Hey, this is Benjamin Boyce. As you probably know by now, I have a discussion for you with Contini, who is either Irish or French, but he lives in the south east of France, close to the UN, and he's got a philosophical YouTube channel and a very prolific blog. I stumbled upon him on Reddit, and I really liked the way that he was engaging in ideas. So this discussion is, I guess it's rooted in existentialism, specifically phenomenology, which comes out of Heidegger and Husserl, and then goes through Sartre, and also with Kierkegaard and Nietzsche thrown into the mix. A bunch of big names. Bigger than our names, but links to his blog and his other work are down in the description. Here's Ren. Are you a practicing philosopher yourself? And I guess that would mean, are you an academic? Or are you a student right now? Or
so I am not an academic. I work in international relations, so it's not really related. I actually initially wanted to be an academic. I have a doctorate in the history of ideas.
Huh.
Yeah, with a focus on Jefferson, actually. So yeah, basically I did my PhD, and it's when I realized I actually didn't want to be an academic, and that I would rather be, it sounds pompous, but I guess like a free thinker. So really not have to submit to any sort of rule or anything. I just wanted to have my job that earns my keep, brings bread to the table, and then be completely free to think. I didn't want to have to do all the various academic-y things that I just didn't really want to do. I wanted to sort of be as free as possible. Of course, that comes with advantages and drawbacks too. But so yeah, I think what's kept the flame alive since the end of my PhD is just my absolute and devouring passion for philosophy. It's a passion. Maybe that's why it's kind of, I enjoy it not being work.
Yeah.
Although I take it, I very much take it as work. I do, and I dedicate a lot of time to it every day. But at the same time, it's still a passion, and that's also, I guess, how I sustain it.
Are you working on a project right now, like a focus or a book or a paper or systemizing something?
I'm always writing. I'm always writing, every day. I'm literally an unhappy man if I'm not writing a little bit every day, even if it makes me tired after work or whatever. I need to do something. And so initially just jotted down ideas about some readings I was doing. And eventually around maybe early 2017 or maybe late 2016, I realized that I was having ideas that could be potentially original or could be presented in a way that could be interesting to audiences. So basically since then, through various stages, I've been working on my original philosophical system, actually. The system that I'm working on is called open monism. It's a system that is monistic, which means that it argues that the very basic substance of the world, although I reject the term substance, but the substratum of everything is actually a single thing, which means monism. In philosophy, you have the sort of different traditions, the dualism of mind and matter, trying to see how they can be resolved, assuming that matter is its own thing and mind is something else. So I'm trying to argue that everything is one single substratum, and I call it open because I try to argue, long story short, that everything is linked by a sense of openness that links everything together.
So is there a specific method that you have in your system? Is your system based on certain axiomatic principles that are then logically laid out, or how is it structured, or how does it produce itself?
My method for now, in my notes, is kind of a dialogue with myself. It's you take a platonic dialogue, and I start with observations about philosophical observations about the world, etc. And I just try to see where they lead me, really, and eventually arrive at some kind of conclusion, and it ends up being sort of one of the tenets of the system. I stick to, and then I move on to something else. In philosophy, like you couldn't call that a phenomenological approach, phenomenology. So in that tradition, the approach is really about trying to describe like the most basic layers of experience. It's trying to get at the heart of what experience is, what being is. You know, the philosophers, the existentialist Heidegger is always talking about being, like the fact of being, like we're here, we exist, we're in the world, but there's something kind of ineffable, something mysterious about this, you know, that links us together. And like the phenomenological approach is about trying to understand what is this thing, what is this layer that's in a way it's hidden, and at the same time it's here, right here. And it's still in notebook. It's a notebook. It's a notebook form. So I could not tell you that it is like that the approach is Nietzschean, so in aphorisms. That was what I did before. So I would say that for now, like my method is kind of dialectic. So it has the kind of like Socratic dialogue, except that it's only with myself, and it draws from like phenomenological analysis in the style of Heidegger, particularly, but also a philosopher called Wittgenstein, from who influences me in terms of his analysis of language, and not so much language for its own sake, but the relationship between language, logic, and the world, trying to argue that there's a connection between like rational, almost mathematical logic, the way that language is articulated, and also the way that being is articulated. And it's trying to get at the heart of being, which is, in a sense, always here with us, and at the same time really hard to describe. Trying to get at the heart of that through trying to describe experience, but also within a structural framework that is very influenced by the Wittgensteinian arguments that the world and logic and language are very intimately connected.
Do you begin with, in one of your phenomenological, I guess, dialogues with experience, do you begin with a physical experience? Do you begin with a social experience, or do you begin with an ideational experience? Do you start with a concept? Do you start with a cup of tea? Do you start with like some argument on the internet? My
collection of aphorisms, which is really the start, it started with the ideational. It started with insights. Usually insights derived from either physical experience or social experience. But in really essential fashion, it's about, saying, okay, so I'm drinking this bottle, and at some point I'm like, but why am I holding this bottle, and what does it mean to be holding this bottle? And then like starting from there and starting thinking, well, maybe is my experience of this bottle saying something about the world? Is there a connection? Is there something bigger? And it's really trying to lay this out. Even though it is technical, it always starts with simple observations. Yeah. There's a video that I recommend you watch if you have time at some point about open monism. It is Open Monism 10, I think. No, is it Open Monism 10 or it's not the last video on Open Monism I did. It's not 11, it's 10 and it's called the 5 attributes. And that one, I think, and from the feedback I got, was very good for people. They understood basically the core of my system. Well, can we start with one of those 5 attributes and unravel that? I'm going to get a bit verbose now, so I'm just to warn you, because it needs a bit of background explanation. So I'm trying to get at the heart of what I call being. Being is like what's implied every time we use the word be, in all its different manifestations. It's what needs to be there for there to be anything at all, And this thing, and I don't think it's transcendental. And that's one of the fundamental aspects of my system, is that I actually kind of reject the transcendental, which in philosophy is kind of a big thing. It means that I cannot do with transcendence. Everything is immanent. Everything is already like around us, except that it comes in 2 different orders, what I call the order of the virtual and the order of the actual. The order of the virtual is basically the totality of facts, which I define as a unit of taking place, and the order of the actual is the totality of events. So I define an event as a form of taking place. Anything, our world which is the actual word, is a massive combination of events, micro events, bigger events, situations that combine different events, and we're part of this. But basically what I'm trying to develop in open monism is to say all of that is actually immanent. It already exists at the level of the virtual, which is the level of the possibility of the taking place. And this level comes, I try to argue, in three aspects, which I call content, structure, and reality. Reality is where, if you like, the sort of logical approach has influence. It simply says the limits of reality provides the limits of being, which means that like anything that cannot be logically conceived is outside of reality, is outside of being. So it's sort of, it provides limits, if you like, to and it echoes something that Wittgenstein said at some point. He said, like, what cannot be talked about we should just pass over in silence. Like, the nothing cannot be even spoken. From the moment that you say nothing, you're already giving a certain substance to the nothing. So I'm trying to say the reality is a very broad concept, because it means that even a unicorn is real in the definition that I provide, which means that, like, in a possible world, if a unicorn is logically conceivable, there is no reason to say that it cannot exist. So it is virtual. It's not actualized in our world, but it still has virtual existence.
Okay.
So that's, like, if you like, those are like the limits of being in the system. It's the limits of reality. Then the structure is something that I spent a long time developing, but maybe for now I'll just say that the content is facts. Facts are basically units of the possibility of taking place, which means that anything that can happen exists virtually. And that's what I define as the content of being, which is then structured. It has a certain structure, which means that in the virtual realm, like, some facts can concatenate together to produce in reality the events that we see, that sometimes are events that are very sporadic, sometimes are events that combine together, lead to human beings being born, having lives, the realm of becoming, doing things, etc., etc. And the content of being, which I describe as immanent, which means that there's nothing hidden somewhere. It's just that it's not necessarily realized. That's all it is. I describe it as having 5 attributes, and that's what we're now at the level of the 5 attributes. So the first one I call intimate, which means that immanence is always with us when it's manifested. So, for example, this again, like, we have to always keep in mind that we're here. I mean, what I'm doing is a work of existential phenomenology. So it's really about trying to get at the deepest possible, I try to get at the deepest possible level of how we can be with things, experience in the deepest way what being is. So it's almost like precognitive, if you like. It's before the making sense of something. And so I'm saying, like,
it's at the level of awareness then?
I would say that it even presupposes awareness.
Okay.
In a way, because if you say that it's at the level of awareness, right? If you say that it's at the level of awareness, then you exclude de facto a lot of things that don't have awareness, and I still want to include in the system. If you take the actual world, not the virtual realm, what has been actualized, what is actualized from that realm into our world, the world that we know, yourself, myself, the phone I'm looking at, your glasses, your earphones, everything. Say in the actual realm, we can maybe divide like 3 forms of existence. Beings, which are of 2 kinds. I call them first order and second order. First order beings being animate beings that do not have self-consciousness. So it's like the animal realm doesn't include us. I define us as second order beings or higher order beings, and I'll explain why I call them that. And then things such as the bottle, such as pens, such as rocks. I'm trying to be as little anthropomorphic as possible. So I'm trying to say, well, we're very tempted to say, well, this bottle, like, it doesn't live, it's artificial. What I'm trying to say is that if we respect the world, if we respect being, we have to respect this bottle too, in a way. Yeah. Even if it sounds strange. in honor of the very fact that it is here, in a way, deserves a certain form of reverence. The reverence that is connected to the idea that we are at all. And the bottle, just like me, has the same attributes that I have. It's structured in the same way, except that it relates to virtuality slightly differently.
It relates to virtuality differently.
It relates to virtuality differently, which means basically that like the future of the bottle, and concretely speaking, we know that the bottle is not going to start having a conversation with us.
Yeah.
We know that it's not going to go smoking, but at the same time, it is still present. It still has a history. Yeah. You could say, like it's not ridiculous to say that like at some point the bottle was produced somewhere. Yeah. Maybe, and the people who made it, it was made by a man who had just divorced, who was sad. Like and you see that there is like this idea of oneness, connectedness. Okay. Yeah. Everything is connected by the facts that link us together. The most trivial fact about you that happened in your day to day, in a certain sense, connects you to someone who's very far away, connects you to something that's far away. And I'm trying to create a system that lays the architecture of how we are all connected. Yeah. If you like.
And why is it important that you include the attitude of reverence towards every particular fact or event of one's experience? The reverence signals the openness to the openness.
Well, it's actually I'm very impressed that you made that connection, because there is definitely a very great link there. So to start with, I do not use the word reverence because it has a certain connotation, potentially, not necessarily, but I really try not to make my work sound religious. Although actually in practice, it vindicates the existence of religion, maybe not established religion, maybe not established church, but the religious feeling in man, insofar as it is the expression of a human feeling, is legitimate in a sense. Now, reverence, which we can call it reverence, we can call it acknowledgement, many things. I think reverence is nice because it does have that dimension of gratitude. Mm. But it's not gratitude to a god or some like weird, like, well, I don't know. I don't want to be insulting to religious people. I am personally agnostic, but some like weird father figure that created the world. I don't subscribe to that. Okay. But I think that is a symbolic attempt at capturing something very true about the fact that, in a sense, we have been given to the world. Whatever it is that gives, I think it is simply being itself. It doesn't have to be personified into a character. Shows that there is a very clear link between this, to me, and the attitude that we should take in our daily lives. And the openness that you're talking about, which is, in a way, something that connects all of us. So, for example, you are open to the possibility of a future. In fact, you're open to a future by virtue of the fact that in the next 10 seconds, we're going to continue talking. Yeah. But this bottle is also open. It's not open to as many things. For example, if you believe in free will, you could say, well, you're open to the possibility of choices in the way that the bottle is not. Then if you take, for example, an animal, the animal is also open to a future which is probably wider than that of this bottle, but not as wide as ours. But we are all open in a sense. And there's a connection between acknowledging that we are open to things that are present around us. Yes. And at the same time, that could also suggest an ethical way to be, because it could also mean that we could apply that openness in how we deal with others, how we deal with the world, and we could derive a practical philosophy from it. An ethical philosophy, if you like, that could be an alternative to the ethical systems that we know that we have, that have been inherited by our tradition.
I wonder if I visualize this openness as a cone, as a conical shape with matter at the very bottom, and then it opens up broader and broader. Probably between matter and the animal is the plant,
Okay.
which operates
Yeah.
purely on urge and
Yeah.
that. And I wonder if once you get up into the human sphere or the self-conscious sphere, if cultivating a certain attitude allows you to progress yourself towards even more openness, right? So at a certain point, there comes not necessarily like a Nietzschean will towards openness, which is more primordial. That's what I mean by that. But an intention to participate in the broadening of that openness to model even further openness. And I wonder if that reverence or whatever you're trying to describe there is one of the steps. That acknowledgement, that recognition opens up further openness. Does that?
Yeah, absolutely. So in fact, this is conceptualized in open monism. I call it the mode of being moral. So I actually even use the word moral because in open monism, if you like, insofar as we exist, we are always doing things. We are never not doing anything because otherwise we would be non-entities. Insofar as we are always doing things, we are always engaged in a mode of practically engaging with the world. Maybe what we're doing is morally neutral, but it's not amoral. It's not so much about trying to perform good actions or bad actions. Not that I reject them, but I try to think more along in terms of trying to cultivate openness that's as wide as possible in all circumstances, knowing that, of course, what happens to us, which is not always the product of our decision, might lead us to not always cultivate that openness, and we should not self-castigate. And that's linked to Nietzsche, who's always, if you remember in my video, I tried to say, well, Nietzsche, I find powerful in him, and I think the reason why he resonates with so many people is that he always says shame is something that we should try never to feel. And I think it can speak to a lot of people, who have been made to feel shameful by sort of traditional moralities of various sorts. And in open monism, there is also that idea, if you sometimes fail to cultivate as much openness as possible to the situations in which you are involved, that's fine. But it should always be about trying to cultivate as much as possible. And to echo the little model that you provided earlier on. So you spoke about the cone with matter and the openness, right?
Yeah.
So it's it's a very, very interesting metaphor that you provided, and quite close to the way I pictured it in my notes. So, in fact, the structure of being, you remember, it's one of the three aspects, alongside contents, that is immanence and reality. The third is open-groundedness. And open-groundedness is basically this idea that we are not just like an openness hanging around, willing, available to just absorb everything, which almost would look like what Sartre defined as radical freedom. Not quite, but that's kind of how it could be understood. I do not believe that's true. Like you said, we are also matter, and we are also a history. There are lots of things that are part of our lives that we didn't decide. Our genetic makeup, our family backgrounds, the way that we were raised, so many things. So this I call the ground, because you remember the basic unit of being in open monism is facts. So if you could you could replace what you defined as matter by a ground, which is the totality of facts that compose you.
Okay.
At every moment. So it's constantly evolving, but it always comes from a place, and you cannot ignore the decisions you've made. They're going to impact your life in the future.
Yes.
So you're not radically free, but you're relatively free, which means that I think we have free will, but it is always free choice coming from a place. And that's what open-groundedness means. It means openness, but if you picture the earth and you see an opening, sometimes I use the image of a well in my writing. So it's very, very solidly inside the earth. It's there, and it's reassuring because it gives us our sense of identity as well. If we were pure openness, it'd be the most depressing. I mean, maybe not depressing, but we'd be so anxious. Oh my God, I do not have any fixity, so we need fixity.
Yes.
We need to make sure that the fixity doesn't smother us.
Yes.
So, in a sense, the more open we are to absorbing new facts, which, in a sense, if you could picture them coming into the ground and enlarging.
Yeah.
Enlarging the totality of the facts that make us, and in a very real sense, you could say enlarge our lives and the panel, like the different sort of level of possibility that we will be able to draw from in the future.
Mm-hmm. So there's always this. It seems like for every openness in action, there's always going to be like a collapsing into fact, a collapsing of that openness into property or into your personal domain of facts, right? It seems like there's this dual movement of openness, but the openness needs to come from a place. If you do it correctly, then you expand the place from which you are going out again, kind of like a day cycle. Like there's the awake time when we're engaging, and then there's a sleep time where that all needs to be processed, where there needs to be an inaction period.
Why? I know, but actually, this is a conversation. I just want to emphasize, I'm working on these notes, and I do not have the last word on them. So our conversation here is probably going to influence my writing. Every time, like any person who has been showing an interest in my philosophy has influenced me. I'm always having the discussions because saying, "Oh, I'm special. I'm going to write on my own, and it's going to be great." That doesn't work. It's so maybe when I was younger and more immature, I was doing that. But so please do raise objections if you have some in mind. But the question I want to ask you in return to your question, so I'm kind of dodging it for now, is you're saying that there needs to be some kind of sleep time to absorb.
Yeah.
Right. To absorb, and I want to ask you, why would there needs to be a moment of absorption? Why is it not happening straight away? Why is it not already from the moment that you make a decision or from the moment that you engage in something? It is already part of your facticity. I mean, the question of your the question of your cognitive making sense of the different things is something else. It's something else. It's not necessarily something that I look into in detail because I try to remain at the level of the formal, the possibility. There's not really it's not a situation in which you engage with the world and then you have to do some sleep time and try to integrate the different things. Because I think that kind of life would be impossible to live. It'd be too much effort. We'd always be tired.
Well, well, what I'm saying is that constant engagement would itself tire one out. And if you're always being engaged, then you don't have time for contemplation, for digestion, for observation. So there's got to be an engagement and then a disengagement on some level. So that a process can occur, like a processing can occur, and then an assessment can occur as well.
I understand better now. Okay, thank you for specifying. So you raised something that's very, very interesting and important, I think, and it is that I'm trying to apply my system in my life, and actually, it's trying to apply it to my own life has helped me massively in improving it, because I realized at some point, but I can't do that. Like maintaining openness. Of course, we could talk about how openness is practiced, concretely speaking, but we can both imagine that trying to maintain constant openness, say curiosity, for example. Let's say that curiosity is one of the manifestations of openness. Well, if you try to be, you seem like an extremely curious person, but you can't be curious 24/7. It's impossible. It's extremely tiring. And I went through a phase not so long ago, in which I burnt out. And it wasn't connected to only that, but I'm pretty sure at a subconscious level, it's also because I was like, oh, I'm so excited what I came up with. It's never been as well fine-tuned and systematic. And I can apply the framework that I want for my life. And hopefully that if it works, also other people can embrace it, because I want people to be happy. There's a connection between openness and happiness, but like I realized, but like this is not making me happy. Like at the end of the day, I'm like, yeah, I'm tired and I'm useless. So but what you're describing, the processing, the thing, I think in a way it's partly up to the individual, So it's like trying to be, and which is why it's not, again, it could never be a good or bad system, like a dichotomous system, like in Christianity, good and evil, in Kant, good actions, bad actions. Most of our moral frameworks are about, performing good actions or bad actions. It will not be possible in open monism, because just like you said, you'd be like, oh my God, but I have to be bad a third of the time, otherwise I'm too tired. But then like you're going to self-castigate and you're going to hate yourself. So it's really about trying to maintain as much openness as possible. Yeah. But again, like you said, not burn out, because if you burn out, and it echoes an idea in Kierkegaard called despair, which is a very influential in the history of. And if you burn out, then you're no longer open to anything. Yeah. And so basically that the point is lost. So it's about knowing yourself too. Yeah.
Yeah. Cultivating as well an openness to one's closedness, an openness to one's finitude. Finitude of facts, finitude of what I own, what I am, but also what I can do. And I don't know if wisdom is necessarily a concept that fits into your philosophy or not, but I wonder if that would be if there's a concept of balance in the process of practicing openness or applied openness.
Well, it's interesting that you're raising that. As a matter of fact, I do not use the concept of wisdom. I wonder if that's like because I do not need it because it is encompassed by another concept, or if it's because I'm afraid of sounding like too stoic. Because wisdom is it's a super important concept in a lot of philosophy. Most of it should be always there.
If you look at the word philosophy, it's kind of
no, absolutely. Wisdom, I guess I do not have a word for it, but I link it to happiness as a practice. But it is kind of equivalent to your understanding of wisdom. So it's the idea, and it comes from also Aristotle was one of the first to say happiness is not a state. It's not a state. It's not something that happens to you. It's not like a feeling. It is a feeling, but it should not be understood as this passive thing, because in a way it's a depressing idea that we should be submissive to the willingness of happiness to manifest itself. And so Aristotle was trying to argue that happiness is very much linked. It's linked to your actions. It's linked to your practical decisions in real life. And the life of a happy man is a practical life. And the feeling of happiness, like what we could define as a feeling of happiness, which has many different incarnations, is something that signals it, that accompanies it, but is not happiness itself. We could informally call it happiness, but it's not. But in open monism, I call it like the cultivation of happiness. But you're raising a good point. Maybe I could integrate this idea of wisdom into the framework, because I do not really have it. I do not really have it because there are no real virtues in my framework, in a way.
But there's a feedback. There is some way of marking your progress, or there's a way of understanding if you're headed in the right, or a better or a worse direction. And happiness is a signal of you potentially moving towards access to more openness, access to more action, access to mastery, access to whatever things make you happy as on your path.
Exactly. The more you make room for openness, the more things are fluid. So I would like also to give the sense to anybody who's reading me that like they're not starting so low that it would take them 5 years to get to a level of wisdom. Of course, there's like good practice and sort of unhappy practice, but openness is something that in principle could be practiced straight away. Maybe it will not open you straight away to as many facts as it can, because there is this feedback effect with your ground. but still it's something that you can practice straight away, and it translates into a lot of different attitudes. And in general, like it's the attitudes that it translates into are attitudes that you find in the traditional moral frameworks, tolerance, because if you being intolerant in a way is closing the possibility of learning from somebody else. So in a way, you are limiting openness, your own openness. So you suffer in the process, the other person suffers in the process. And because the world is openness, the world itself suffers in the process.
I had a question that I wanted to pose you to go back to earlier in our discussion. You were talking about virtuality, and you brought up like a unicorn has a certain facticity or certain reality to it, even if it's not going to be manifest in the physical world and in the world of event, or communal event. I wonder if that could be a stepping off point for a critique of utopianism, or a critique of, we can all imagine a perfect world with ultimate tolerance. I want to kind of make it political, just so we can ground it in something that people who watch my channel interact with. With like the way that social just progressivism is progressing, it seems like there's this attitude of utopia that frustrates itself, and then they start acting out in a negative way because their telos is this perfect world of, let's just say, perfect tolerance, which has a reality because they can envision it. But just because something has a reality that we can envision doesn't mean that it's not going to result in the opposite of that envisionedness. And I wonder if you have some tools of critiquing specifically utopianism or anything else like that like these fictitious possible worlds that continually result in the worsening of the shared world, of the worsening of the social world, something like communism or socialism or something like that.
Okay. Do you see that? Like, you seem to have like an interest in that topic, or is it just like one of your many topics of interest?
I was wondering about, like, just because something is imaginable, we can say that the unicorn has reality. We can say that my dreams have reality. We can say that a shared or collective dream has even more reality than my own dream. So a dream, a socially shared dream of a socially just world still needs to, the dream itself can still be corrupted and lead people in mass down a path that results in terror. Let's just say, to talk about the French Revolution.
Yeah, French Revolution, you're right. Communism, Mao, like so many utopian enterprises. I just want to shout out a person whose name is Rowan. I don't think he will mind me mentioning him because he's one of my readers. Readers, I mean, I don't want to say he's one of my readers. He himself is an amazingly talented writer and editor. And he is like a super utopian. So we might be obsessing him in the next 10 minutes. So yeah, it's really interesting because my PhD thesis was actually called Nurturing Utopia.
Okay.
And if you allow me just a tangent for a minute,
please.
The whole idea was that the idea of, like, under Jefferson, of an American utopia. I'm just trying to. I'm going to like paint it in broad brushstrokes, so it's. But like, could also be an excuse for expropriation of lands from Native Americans in the name of an ideology which in itself is not attainable. There's always need for more land, and in the end ends up justifying what you could call a form of imperialism. At least it deserves to be put on the table. Okay. And that was in the name of utopia. And the reason why I called my thesis Nurturing Utopia is because utopia is something that always has to be nurtured, since by definition it's never attained. But in the nurturing of it, the actors who are at the forefront could end up making use of this idea that they're always going towards it to eliminate the people. Once they access more power, they eliminate the people who are contesting their power. And it's always in the name of this utopia. And it's extremely powerful because it's never reached. There's never this solution, this conclusion. So So honestly, in that respect, maybe Rowan will convince me otherwise in the future, but that's still what I think about utopia personally. And in open monism, if you like, I do not think there is any risk of open monism sort of, if it is well understood, legitimizing this like hardline utopianism, fictitious world, in the name of which we end up, leading to the opposite of what was originally aimed for. Because there is a distinction between virtuality and actuality. So, for example, to come back to our bottle, this bottle has actual being. So far as I can tell, phenomenologically speaking, I describe my experience of holding the bottle. Mm-hmm. To me, that's evidence that the bottle has actual being. It also has virtual being, which means that like it translates into this actuality. But from the point of view of our world, there are things that are real insofar as they are logically conceivable. Again, let me be clear. This is like a presuppose. This is, to use a term you used earlier, it's an axiom of open monism. It's not something that people have to accept. They can reject it outright and say, I do not believe this, I do not take this seriously, and that's okay. It's what I presupposed in order to be able to develop what I'm developing. And the axiom is, anything that is logically conceivable is real. So it's a very maximalist understanding of reality, but it is tempered by this distinction between actuality and virtuality, which means that we are actual beings. In a certain sense, you could say we perform the realization of a certain segment or portion of a virtual immanent space. We are actual performances. We're performing it in a sense.
Yeah, but we're on the razor's edge of actuality. Such is our position as actors and as dreamers and as thinkers. We are performing at the very edge of actuality.
Oh yeah. Yes, yeah. But yeah, and like we are open to virtuality. Yeah. In a certain sense, which means that that's what I tried to argue. Yeah. It means that you, for example, Ben, I refuse the argument that says that like your current facticity, the totality of the facts that make you now, has already determined everything that you will be doing until death. I think there is an openness to virtuality in this sense, which is not available to the bottle, but is available to you because you have open will. I call it open will rather than free will. But so that's fine. But that does not mean that you have the power to make everything that is virtually real actually real. Yeah. And that is a very great danger. You're absolutely right about this. Okay. It's what I call the reification of the virtual. I don't know if you're familiar with this term, reification.
Can you?
I might be pronouncing it reification. So re, the thing, the res publica, re publica, the public thing. So reification is basically it's a fallacy. It's a fallacy it's a logical fallacy, an informal fallacy. We perform it all the time. It's very difficult not to reify anything. But essentially, when it's what utopianism does, is to start talking about a state of affairs that is ideal. Yeah. And it becomes so familiar to them that then they start talking about it as if it really existed or was something that could be eventually achieved if X, Y, and Z were performed. So reification is trying to, I give you another example. It's very difficult because sometimes my readers, they're like, oh, so this concept of open ground is really interesting, etc., etc. And then they're like, but how do grounds function in the real world, right? And for a while, even myself, I was like, yeah, how can I explain how ground function? But then I was like, but ground is only a symbol. It's an analogy. It's a way to describe how we as humans are open from a place. We dwell somewhere, we have a past, we have a culture, we have a social realm. Yeah. These massively impact us, but we have an openness. So the ground is that, but the ground doesn't actually have existence. And to reify the ground is to say the ground is a thing. It's like a thing that exists in the world, but it's more a symbol, And in the very same way, like people who speak about utopia, they could end up speaking about it as if something that could be achieved, even though it's actually something virtual And it is absolutely not certain by any means that it can be achieved as such. And in open monism, it is very clear that the utopian state is impossible in its incarnation, in the incarnation that you described earlier. Yeah. All that can be done in open monism is striving towards a state of affairs that is as good as possible. But it cannot. You cannot say there is the virtual ideal, and we're going to project ourselves towards it now if we do this and that, because the virtual ideal is virtual. It's not accessible to us.
Yes.
It can only be made. It can only be made to seem accessible if we reify it. But to reify it is an illicit logical practice.
I wonder if one trend that I see with the utopian mindset is that it ends up conceiving of other people as being in the way of this thing that, you, as you say, is reified, something that's been dreamed up and then is acted as though it's real, or at least real if these other things weren't in the way. It ends up almost, to use your analogy, your system, your language, almost like people, and not like with Jefferson took away actual physical land from physical people. Yeah. But what's happening in the virtual space, what's happening in the media space, in the public sphere, is that people, with regards to free speech, people are trying to steal the ground of other people, or shut down other people, or limit the grounding of other people. Yeah. By one tactic that they use is they make the people who are their ideological opponents evil by calling them all these things, you know, racist or supremacist or misogynist, all these things, to cast them out of access to speech, to actually and not just limiting their opponents' access to other people, but also limiting their opponents' access to developing and refining their arguments, developing and refining their view of the world to possibly even gain more openness and not be so closed with regards to race or class or gender. Like that. So it seems like I'm kind of working backwards with this tentative insight that when we posit a utopia, something that isn't, we dream up an ideal state, then we start to act as though this ideal state is possible, and we get frustrated. I see this time and again, that people get frustrated with the unrealizability of their utopia, and so they start to attribute the failure of their dream to other people who don't have their dream. Who don't share in this thing that's not real yet.
Yeah, of course. And I'm sure that, you know, with the political dimension, you probably have like a whole psychoanalytical dimension of projection, shaming. I mean, like what you're describing. I mean, I'm also very familiar with it, and it can get a bit scary when it's a single person doing it. It's like, okay, it's not pleasant, but when it's like it becomes a movement, it can become, I think you're right, it can become quite dangerous. And I think that in some respects, nothing is more dangerous than somebody who has too pure an ideal, you know, because it can be an ideal that's divorced from reality, and then indeed when it fails to materialize, like terrible things can happen as a result, because there is a mix of resentment, disappointment, trying to point the finger at those who are not there to help, you know, make the things take place. And some violent means can be developed. And that is very much a fact of the modern world, you're right. But I think that the virtuality of their vision suffers from not being well enough separated from the actuality of our real condition. And so they end up mixing the real, like the actual real and the virtual real. You know, and in general, I'm suspicious personally of giving too much power to not only to a vision, but to like some kind of state. You know, I don't know. I just find that,
like you said earlier.
Yeah, I mean, like in a certain sense, my system is all about trying to reconcile the idea that happiness happens at the level of the individual, right? So A Marxist could say, or somebody who, I don't know, like many people could say, well, happiness is something that is shared.
Yeah.
And I would say, yeah, but via the concept of openness, it makes it shared. It means that like I'm always open to, my happiness is always projected into the happiness of the next person. But it's a fundamentally non-aggressive system, you know. And to be completely honest, it could be naive politically in the sense that it depends on the goodwill of the people.
Yeah.
People who want if we decide that people want power, and that like that's always going to drive their motives, they'll have no use. You know, they have no use for open monism. Open monism is, I think, almost more addressed to people who want to. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
No, I just wonder. I wonder if openness, in a way, and this is just a thought, is a sublimation of the will to power, or if it's a refinement of the drive or that hunger for power in the Nietzschean sense.
A sublimation. I think you could say like that potentially openness. Yeah, at some points in my videos, I compare the will to power to a Kamehameha. You know, in Dragon Ball, like when it's like a laser that is produced by Sangoku, and it's like that thing, like it emerges out of us, and like we need to express our, you know.
Okay.
I just want to specify that I think for Nietzsche, that's my own interpretation. But the will to power in Nietzsche is not necessarily power over other people, political power. It's like in French we have a very interesting distinction between two words that both translate as power in English. Pouvoir, okay, which means power, and exactly. So you speak a bit of French. Puissance is very much how I understand the Nietzschean. It's more akin to like a very good health, you know, like when you wake up in the morning and you're like, I could do so many things, you know, I'm full of vigor, but it's not like a bellicose kind of vigor necessarily. It's not trying to impose it on others. It's more like enhancing, like a self-enhancing kind of mode as much as possible. And that's, under that interpretation, I would say that there is a link between that and open-groundedness in open monism. But if you like, that thirst for health is a thirst for factical enhancement, in a way, being as open as possible to facts around you, because that will inevitably create possibilities. You know, but it's not. I mean, of course, I've asked myself the question before: could you potentially imagine a situation in which, like, factical enhancement could be promoted by dominating people, by imprisoning people? You know, someone could come here and say, well, yeah, okay, you promote openness, but what if your openness to, you know, virtuality, or, you know, and facts was actually enhanced if you dominated, if you crushed a few people, you know? And basically, like, I develop, it would be difficult to explain it in detail here because it's quite technical, but I develop a whole argument in one of my chapters where I show that it is impossible to promote one's own openness by crushing the openness of another person.
Yeah, I think and this is totally from the hip, I think that if domination means opening others to their own enhancement, because every person that you interact with gives you access to potentially more and more enhancement, observation, understanding. So
exactly.
If by dominating, and this isn't dominating anymore, but if by dominating means in causing other people by trickery or by inspiration to be more engaged with their own manner of plugging into the world, that enhances you. I don't know if that's that's a trick.
Yeah. No, it's you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. That's how I see things. I think that's like the only thing that we would have to resist in these cases is, again, another kind of projection, the projection of, wanting immediate gratification. So it's like thinking that from our point of view, oh yeah, you preach this idea of like openness, but how come I don't feel like I'm benefiting from like being open, like to the possibilities of like the people around me, of things around me, of animals around me. And like in open monism, what I really try to argue is that like it's, even though we are human beings, we have our different faculties, and a human being is a very important actor in open monism. In a sense, it is so important an actor that it is the actor that most try to see it as their task to promote as much openness for the sake of not just themselves, for the sake of the world. So perhaps from their very limited point of view, they could say, well, I'm not benefiting from this. But the idea is that if people were to cultivate that openness in general, then undoubtedly the world as a whole would benefit from it and would be factically enhanced. But it has to be the locus has to be placed at the level of the world, which is actually consistent with open monism. So it is a system of oneness. So in the end, being is the oneness. And like if there is a reverence for being, we must also act in such a way that we enhance being. We are part of being anyway. We are engaged in it, so we do benefit from it. But the immediate gratification cannot be seen because it is a tiny contribution to the enhancement of something that's much bigger than us. But that in itself is a good thing.
Yeah, but the having that attitude allows for momentary suffering, momentary closedness, or whatever the opposite of openness is: pain, suffering. The inability to act. Still, having cultivated an attitude towards the oneness of reverence, or whatever you want to call it, allows one to kind of delay the gratification, or delay, or suffer through that momentary finiteness.
It's the idea. Spinoza has beautiful things to say about that. I do not embrace his metaphysics because, the metaphysics of Spinoza are completely deterministic. So there is no place for free will, and I cannot personally accept that. But Spinoza is a wonderful philosopher, one of the most wonderful human beings also. Because a lot of philosophers, they have like all those grandiose systems, and then like in their real life, you realize that they were like not nice, or they were like interested in their careers. Or Spinoza apparently was an absolute model of benevolence, of kindness, everything. And he says whenever you feel like, because he says, well, the world, nature, the universe is God, it's undifferentiated. And it's perfect. And if you think that, there is this imperfection, it's because, sometimes it can be a very grave form of imperfection. If like a relative dies or something, and people would be like, how is that a perfect world? But Spinoza would say, I know it's hard, but take some time and try to always keep in mind, it's not at your level that the perfection can be seen. It's always at the level of the cosmos, and you could say it's the best way to becoming passive and accepting everything, which is why I reject it. But you could really imagine that for some people who are in really, really difficult times in their lives, it can help them. And ultimately, I think that ties in with what I think is my motive for writing this, is to, if you can help a few people, if you can expand the horizons of some people, to take in, not to say open monism is like the new religion, but to say, that's another way of looking at reality and the world, and if it can help them see things in perspective, and that's connected to the whole idea that like, if you do not get you should be able to delay the gratification. Maybe that's a sign of having wisdom, because that it is not at your level that it already takes place, even though you are a part of it.
Yeah. Ren, this has been a wonderful conversation. I have to run off to work soon.
Okay, well, listen, I'm not going to take any more of your time, but I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank you immensely for
Absolutely.
this, for giving me the chance to talk and taking such an interest for someone who has like not a lot of following. I appreciate it, and also I want to say like that's to talk so much about open monism. If I had known, I would have prepared a bit more. But just like it's been great. It's been really a fantastic experience, and I'm grateful.